You are the king. Yeah, yeah, I love that. King of the class, man. Take your crown, king. Crown, king. Crown, king.
We'll be on to tell a debrief, part two.
And I'm here for. And let me say this: like, our job in LEO is difficult, right? So one of the things that the New York Times article points out is that the detective Crossgrove said that he could not really remember, like it was just like a white and black TV screen just going back and forth. He really couldn't remember how everything was going out, how it was playing out. So there's this thing called use of force science, right? And pretty much it teaches law enforcement officers what to expect if you ever get in a situation like that. Some people the adrenaline kicks in, survival instincts kick in, your limbic nerve system spikes up, your serotonin goes down, and all of a sudden you are in this innate survival mode. Like, and people have described how like they become super visual and like they can actually see the bullet, or they become super audio and they start hearing things that they never really heard, or they become super tactile and they start feeling like they remember how they cold or whatnot, and so in those moments it's possible that one you just really struggle to recall in your long-term memory of what happened. A lot of times officers don't really remember right after the shooting because they're still trying to calm down from the adrenaline rush, and then you also have this long-term effect. Like sometimes you can take a day or two and allow yourself to kind of settle and you start remembering more things. But it's reasonable that one of the things he said he thought there was a long gun. He thought it was a rifle or AR-15, and they did not find an AR-15. They found it was a handgun. And someone could easily perceive that as like him not being honest or him not being forthright.
Right.
But the reality of it is that your mind will perceive a bigger threat than actually exists. Right. So you have like perception versus perspective, and that perspective talks about what it measures to be. Right. So you can look at LeBron James and say he's 6'9", right? That's perspective. It's a standard. Perception of LeBron James is that dude tall.
That dude is tall.
Right.
Yes.
That's how you feel about it.
He's huge.
That's your opinion of him measured to that standard, right? That dude is tall. So like his perspective was, I mean, clearly it was a firearm, but his perception, how he felt about that firearm, and when that adrenaline rush hits you, you that gun looks like it's right in front of you. He probably had an audio, not audio, a visual enhancement, and probably thought that gun was right in his face.
Exactly.
And was like, oh man, he's in here with a long gun, and so it started returning fire.
Right. So to put it in like a layman's perspective,
Thanks.
My girlfriend is deathly afraid of snakes. She really is. And again, moved into this nice community with this huge backyard. She goes outside one day to take the trash out, dump the trash, comes running back in the house and says, oh my God, there's a huge snake on the patio back there.
Yeah.
Go get it.
Yeah, go get it.
It's huge. Well, baby, what does the snake look like? I don't know. It's black. It's really, really long, and it's really, really huge, is the words that were used. CVC goes out on the patio to look for this huge snake. Believe it or not, I have my gun in my hand because I'm expecting a huge snake.
Which, by the way, if it's a handgun, probably ain't gonna
do nothing to that snake. Nothing. Probably gonna miss.
Probably gonna miss. He probably better off with a shovel or something.
Again, to put this all in perspective, what C-Dub is saying, I go out to look for this huge snake, and this snake is actually about 9 inches long,
Oh man.
and it's clearly a baby. But because of her fear
Yeah.
of this object, of this snake, of this thing, because she has this fear of this thing, that thing is huge to her.
Yeah.
So if we take it back to what C-Dub was saying about the officer seeing a gun or hearing a voice, it's that factor of, number one, the unknown, some fear, because if you're not scared while you're out serving these warrants, there's something psychotically wrong with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah. It's
a gun.
you got to have courage to.
so to put it all in perspective, yes, our mind kind of sort of does make things bigger than they are at times because of those factors.
Yeah. Yeah.
That force science that he was talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that like when we look at to try to further understand like the officer's perspective of it. So there's a lot of times too where I think sometimes, especially when you're a detective, you can do so many search warrants that you can kind of like take for granted the safety that you're sacrificing in doing those search warrants.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like search warrants are a very common thing, especially when you're a narcotics investigator. And we can talk about how that's changing now with all the marijuana laws kicking in. But for this conversation, those have a significant impact on your ability to recall and be ready and be in your tip-top mental agility and preparedness and alertness on every search warrant. You got to be there, right? You got to be ready for it. And I think that like sometimes having the offender already in custody, having the main target in custody, thinking it's going to be something slight, probably nonchalantly banging on the door.
Right.
Not saying he did this.
Right.
I'm just saying I've seen this happen. Like nonchalantly banging on the door. Just fortunately, it didn't end that way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or sometimes I don't know. It can be difficult for officers in order to consistently and to do their job perfect every time, right? Because in some jobs you can get away with not doing something right the correct way,
Right.
and the consequences are very small. In law enforcement, if you mess up one time, unintentionally, the consequence could be huge
And catastrophic.
Catastrophic.
Yep.
I mean, we're talking. I mean, and of course, it impacts the citizen that's involved,
Right.
or the property that's involved, but it also impacts the department that's involved. And it also impacts the community that supports that department, and it also impacts that officer.
Right.
So, like, being in that moment, I get it. Like, I don't think the guy did anything malicious. I don't think he, at least from what I see here, I don't think he went in there and said like,
I'm going to go in
I'm
and
go- I'm-
go ahead and
right.
I'm going to kill somebody. He
Correct.
did not say that.
I don't think he did that at all. And as a matter of fact, I don't even think that it sounds like he didn't even perceive a threat,
Right.
right? Just nonchalant. But if you aren't if you aren't prepared to take that risk and put yourself in danger every time, and therefore do your calculated decision making to increase your survivability,
Right.
you're gonna get caught off guard. And unfortunately, if you get caught off guard one time
One
in law
time.
enforcement,
Yep.
all it takes is one time. You know what I mean? And so that is the pressure, you know what I mean, that all law enforcement officers deal with. Like I said, the things that led up to this moment, they could have been way better. You know what I mean? And I think, and him responding in that way while I was in that building, that's how anyone would respond, right? If someone was shooting at you, you would shoot back. I'm not saying he was justified. I'm not saying he was right. I'm just saying that most people, especially who carry firearms, if somebody's shooting at you, you're probably going to shoot back. Right? That's just an innate response.
Right.
And I think that kind of rules out any maliciousness or malice, premeditated thought, any of that. But I think what all it comes down to, though, is the decision making leading up to that moment did it make his behavior negligent?
Right.
And not from a conviction like he's guilty of that, because that would have to be proven in court, and that would require the explanation of this evidence by experts better than me, by attorneys who've been doing it.
Right.
However, from a probable cause perspective, from a grand jury perspective, it kind of feels like maybe there's some
There.
there. Right, that's a police phrase. There's some there.
There's
You know
some
what I mean? So yeah. So I guess we belabored that a little bit longer than I expected, but I mean it's all good. The article goes on to talk about how skeptical the jurors were of the testimonies. They were asking questions about whose name was on the search warrant, and what officers saw when the doors opened, and whether the officers knew that Jamarcus Glover, the ex-boyfriend of Miss Taylor, who was the target of the investigation, whether they knew he was already arrested. So the jurors have had several questions, and I'm looking at this last part of this article, and
In the article that he is referring to. Is from the New York Times, published October 2nd, 2020.
So they did
follow along.
Yeah. If y'all so choose, and I've chose those one because, like I said, they had the most detail. But if when you look at the, he said they didn't recover any drugs or money because the apartment was not searched after the shooting.
Yeah. So question:
why wasn't the apartment searched?
If you have a warrant. And your warrant kind of sort of intimates drug and paraphernalia and the things that go along with it. After you concluded the service of this warrant, why was there no search conducted and evidence collected?
So there had to be some type of for narcotic purposes, right? So yes, why are we? Not only are we not search. Now, granted, I'm not saying yes, it's a traumatic moment. Don't get me wrong, right? So you go in there for a search warrant, shooting happens, shots fired, citizens coming out, people come rushing out to get you, blue lights everywhere, ambulance trucks out there. You got citizens coming out trying to see what's going on. You got yellow tape everywhere. Everybody's asking if you're okay. You're gonna have the chief coming out there. You probably have the city manager coming out. It's just it's gonna be a lot,
chaos.
right? It's gonna be a huge case. At some point, the case is given to either a supervisor to kind of govern the. They're going to develop a incident command system, and they're going to have a supervisor overview, make sure that once we knock out getting the people taken care of, now we have to take care of the scene.
The scene, right? And
to not after all that rush, right? At some point, once all the rush is done, there has to be more of a smoothing, a calming, where you can sit back and say, now let me make sure we execute and take all things. You forget to do the search warrant. So, the chance of you uncovering drugs, it matters to me if there were drugs to be recovered.
Right.
I mean, that to me, that is significant because it shows, okay, now granted, whether or not drugs were recovered does not invalidate the search warrant.
Right.
The search warrant is valid because of the probable cause, not because of the drugs that were there. So that's clear. But when somebody dies, I want to know if there were actually drugs recovered. And here's the other thing. They didn't do a diagram of the scene.
Right.
So a diagram is just another way of saying whenever you see crime scene text on your favorite police investigative show, mapping out the scene, drawing a sketch of the body, looking at bullet splatter, identifying shell casings, doing it's very scientific. They're doing their XY graph. I mean, this is key in all homicides. It wasn't done. Come on, man. Come on, no evidence search. It must have been, and it must have been so hectic. And now, granted, this can happen. It's just a disappointment that it didn't. Right. It didn't happen. You know what I mean? It's very possible to get flustered and panic, and everything goes wrong, and people miss steps. That can happen, but should it happen? No, it should not happen. And then, last but not least, and we all know this, it's just that they didn't have the body cameras turned on. So, with all these factors that I'm listing out, certain departments you can get fired for not having your body camera on.
Right.
The body camera, I was here before the body camera phase. I've been here during the body camera phase, and I would say the body camera is one of the best things that has happened, because a lot of citizens who might have made complaints that were illegitimate have been disproven.
Right.
A lot of lawsuits have been prevented by the body camera. But it also helps the citizens feel comfortable and and have more of a verification. Like Reagan said, trust but verify, right? So we allow citizens to verify the performance of these law enforcement officers while they're on scene. So the question is if you don't have your body camera on, you're not taking the diagram of the scene, you're not collecting the evidence that you said you were there looking for. Mm-hmm. My trust in you and in this department,
way down.
Oh my gosh!
It's non-existent.
So then, when I go further up and I'm looking at, okay, well, the bullet, FBI says the bullet came out this gun, even though they said theirs didn't. Right. And then I go up and they say the Attorney General wouldn't release what he said, but all of a sudden, and we know that it's just the AG and the grand jury, and all of a sudden now you aren't able to tell us what he said, but we do know that he came on the press conference and said that the officers were justified, but we were expecting the jury to deliberate whether or not they were justified.
Right.
I mean, you throw in the fact that, like I said, he was expecting someone there. He heard a voice. He expected a woman to be there who had no criminal record. She voiced herself, and they knocked for 2 minutes at nighttime when people are sleeping. I mean, they already had the guy arrested. When I look at all of this,
the totality
of the circumstances, which is another way of putting together probable cause.
Right.
I feel like there is reason to believe that there is some neglectful behavior that led to the death of someone.
Oh, right.
Right? And then here's the other thing. Because the search warrant process was so bad, one thing that the AG said in his press conference was that they were going to review the search warrant process for the state and put a committee together and I guess try to come up with a way to make sure it's done effectively. Which reminded me of this phrase used in law enforcement called lawful but awful. Lawful but awful is a phrase that's used to describe a lot of officer-involved shootings or use of force incidents that met the legal threshold but just really looked horrible or
from
bad.
A non-law enforcement perspective.
From a law enforcement perspective.
Horrible.
And honestly, from a law enforcement perspective, it can still look horrible. But from a legal, whether they were legally justified in it, it was legal.
It was legal.
And so what we have here, what you would hear a lot of law enforcement people say was like, hey, all of this is ugly. It's horrendous. I hate that it happened. I hate to see that it happened. But whether or not this was illegal, you would hear some law enforcement people say they don't know.
They don't know.
There's a chance that they believe that this could have been all legal behavior, and they're going to trust the system to determine whether it was legal. But so that is the perspective of the law enforcement side. It's like, hey, it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look great at all. There needs to be new training. There needs to be people fired. There needs to be this. But was it legal? That's one thing. But from a black community side, it's like, and what other profession can you be lawful and awful?
Right. And,
right.
and still be employed. Or not indicted.
Like, right. If I'm a plastic surgeon,
mm-hmm.
and you come out of this surgery with like one hip bigger than the other, or you come out missing more of your prostate than you were expecting. Right. Right. I mean, it was a lawful surgery.
Mm-hmm.
It was just awful. Yeah, right. That guy's getting sued for malpractice. Yeah, I mean, civil legal. Yeah, what are you talking about? We're talking about if you were at Burger King and you slipped and put your glove in somebody's bag when you were handing out their food, which sounds disgusting, by the way. But it was just you can get fired.
Right.
And then Burger King will get sued.
That's right. And
right?
we're not minimizing people.
Not at all.
We're not doing
No.
that. These are just examples.
What I'm pointing out is that in a either you can be a medical doctor with
Right.
all this schooling profession, or you can be a 15, 16-year-old who works at McDonald's. The lawful but awful standard does not apply.
Does not apply.
But
at
when
all.
you apply it, but is used to describe law enforcement.
Right.
And so that's what the black community is saying. It's like, why is lawful but awful acceptable for us?
Yeah.
Or even worse,
That's right.
why is lawful but awful acceptable for only us? Because if it's somebody else that doesn't look like us, that looks more like you,
Right.
then lawful and awful are hand in hand at that point.
And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit
Go ahead.
to another podcast that we are going to get to, dealing with two words: qualified immunity. We will get to that
Yeah,
podcast.
definitely. We gotta touch on that.
When we get to that, the lawful but awful that'll come into play.
Right. Absolutely. So we're definitely gonna get to that. So yeah, actually, I think this is probably a good time to just stop. Because if we keep going, we're just gonna be jumping from subject matter to subject matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think these and this like I said, these are questions we have. I'm not making a final decision. I do not envy being in an office position. I know at any day doing this job that I could easily be an officer on a
That's
TV.
right. I can be on.
You know what I mean?
television.
So
Yep.
like, I don't take for granted that this officer has a tough job and is in a tough situation. And at the same time, I know any day I know can be Breonna Taylor in their house. Right. And that's the juxtaposition of being black guys in law enforcement. It's like, I can be either one. I can identify. And identifying, that's a whole nother podcast.
Whole nother podcast.
I don't know, we setting y'all up, man.
I know.
I got to tune back in. But look, the identify piece is key, though. Because, and I'll just touch on this part of it because I ain't going to go too far into it. If I grew up in a all-white community, in a all-white community, I'm just going to leave it like that, and then I stayed in that community, and then I went to a college, and it was a largely public white institution, and then, or even a private, whatever, and then I decide that I want to come to this minority community to police. I'm now policing people that I may not identify with.
Right.
On a deeper level, I'm policing people that I did not even have. I didn't have to go through the practice of identifying with people that I did not look like me because I was raised in a community where they all look the same.
Right. And you don't have a cultural basis to police from.
Yeah, oh my gosh. All right, we got to stop.
That's
man.
another.
Yeah,
That's
gotta
another
stop.
podcast topic.
All right, well, look, man, it's been a pleasure. Like, we hope this comes across clear as possible. We know that we kind of get, delve in on the topics a little bit, and we know we kind of get deep into the lingo, but we'll get better. I mean, this is like the beginning for us, and we just really want this to be a resource. We want it to be a resource for the black community and the blue community. We hope that we can articulate the difficulty of the job, whether it's the legalities of it, and have some opinion, but not too much to the point where we like offend everybody. Right. Our goal is, I mean, if we offend people, but that's not our goal. Right? Our goal is to try to like help people understand each side, each perspective, and like why people may be upset. People are protesting outside because it's not even probable cause.
Right. Yeah,
It's not even probable cause.
There's no rhyme or reason for a lot of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, people are protesting because they don't know.
Yeah, like that's all it is. Like this is not even probable cause, really.
Right.
And I think that's what people make like, man, like it's not even probable that this happened. Right. And I think when you ask those questions, I think people become like, okay, well, I can understand. I have these conversations with my coworkers, right? I have these conversations in my job, and I think that like I can make a small difference with the one person, two people who are willing to have that conversation. But I feel like having on this platform can make that difference as far as on a larger audience perspective. Kind of scales, use a millennial term, it scales us out. It's a scalable platform. But I think that makes a big difference as far as our ability to understand both sides, to understand why people are protesting, and to understand why police officers are, or people in my community are looking at protesters like they're they're overreacting or they're not reacting appropriately because they ultimately will admit that it's awful, but they won't agree that it's illegal.
That's right. Again, the future podcast, the cultural basis for being able to police specific or certain communities.
Absolutely. So we care about our people, man.
Yeah.
And then black people aren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Policing isn't going anywhere.
As a matter of fact, according to some sources, the black people are going to be taking over. Really soon.
Well, hey, look, I need to see that source. But you know what though? Like, I think that there's a significant increase in minority population in the country, and I know that there's a lot of ways of looking at that and how that impacts policing as well, and hopefully we can get to that. I think that once people in our community can see things from another person's perspective and have the right questions to ask in politics, have the right questions to ask to your press, to the leaders of the community, to the chief, to the city manager, to the councilwoman or councilman, whatever. These are, I feel like, the right questions that are going to help us get the progress we need. All right, y'all. I'm going to shut it down. You ready to shut it down, CBC?
Ready to shut it down. Hey,
all
just
right.
want real quick, again, C-Dub did say that we touched on a lot of topics. And some of the topics that we touch on, you might be scratching your head and saying, what the heck are they talking about?
Right.
Well, if you have those kinds of questions, one more time, give that
and we are
email.
on the Black Cop Podcast at gmail.com, the Black Cop Podcast at gmail.com.
That's right.
And follow us on Instagram at the Black Cop Podcast. Follow it, like our Facebook page on the Black Cop Podcast. Just look up, type in Black Cop Podcast. It's pretty much you're gonna find us there. Instagram, Facebook. We're gonna have a YouTube page shortly, and just post some material on like officer safety, how to survive a traffic stop, how to handle police and citizen interaction. So hopefully those things make a difference. You know what I mean? And this is the conversation this is not the neighborhood watch conversation that I go to while I'm at work. This is the conversation I have with my family, my brothers and sisters, and how we can try to ask the right questions, get the right answers, and survive and improve our interactions. So again, at the Black Cop Podcast and also the Black Cop Podcast at gmail.com. All right, y'all. And look, and also we are open to donation. If y'all feel like y'all like what y'all hear and y'all want to support us or y'all want to help us keep this thing going, feel free. We will have our PayPal and Cash App accounts open, and you guys can just chime in and give what you can if you so choose. But anything will help, and let us know. Give us some feedback.
Yeah,
let us know if we can constructive criticism. Don't give me no BS. You know what I mean? Like, look, if there's some legitimate ways that we can improve, I will really look into it, because ultimately I want to give a good product. I just don't want to give good information. I want to give a total good production, and we really want to improve that and as we go. So if you have some information, please share that with us. Let us know, because we ultimately want to. And this is for everybody. So proliferate it. Share it with your friends. Share it with your coworkers. Share it with your family. Love y'all. Be safe. Peace.